welcome to the Tired F1 Pod. We're back and better than ever. Ammar, how you doing?
I'm tired, man, but I'm also back and better than ever. I'm excited.
Excited. Yeah, me too. So after a pretty intense Australian Grand Prix weekend, we've had a bit of a lull before the Japanese Grand Prix next week. But we thought that now was a good time to just stop and take stock of the driver market, which is still pretty volatile at the moment. And there are a couple of seats that I think are prime for us to have a chat about. Um, and all of this kind of revolves around Red Bull
Mhm.
and what Red Bull are going to be doing. So initially, the biggest driver move that we've ever seen, and we thought we were going to see in the last sort of 5 years or so, was Lewis going to Ferrari. But suddenly that might be topped by Verstappen potentially leaving Red Bull. And whether that's actually realistic or not, it does create some interesting storylines for what other drivers might be doing in the coming weeks or so. And even if that's not realistic, that's not a possibility, Perez's seat at Red Bull is also an uncertainty and a potential target for other drivers down the grid. And that kind of creates a ripple effect for what might happen in other vacant seats. And the other big one is the Mercedes one. So just want to have a little chat about
Mhm.
what we think is going on at different seats. And I thought the easiest one to start off with is the Perez seat.
Yeah, I agree. I think that seems to be the seat that is primed for change, although it would be a tad bit unfair, right? He's done quite well, Australia aside, and we're only an eighth of the way through the season. That seems a bit rough, but I think we had heard enough about his seat being in jeopardy for the last few months, if not even longer than that. So I'm going to take a stab at this, and the obvious situation that I think would make a lot of sense, albeit it would be a short-term one, is Carlos Sainz.
Yep.
We've talked about how he wants to be in a race-winning car. He is a multiple race winner now, and he has proven to be someone who, if given the right car, the right team, not having to call strategy calls from within the car too, those kind of things that Red Bull seem like they're pretty well adept to doing. It seems like he would be the first candidate for that seat, albeit it might just be for a year or two at the most.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dig into that one a little bit. So first of all, does that mean that you would put in science ahead of any of the uh,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. I know what you're
potential for
saying.
that
Yeah,
seat?
yeah,
So that would mean that number one, Perez is out on his ear. We think that he hasn't done enough, even though actually for Bahrain and Saudi, he did absolutely what he was asked to do. Backed up Max. Perhaps could have qualified a bit better in Bahrain, but actually did what he needed to. And only in Australia, where let's face it, the optics of that were awful. The one moment that Red Bull really needed him to step up and win a race, he was way down. But we know that he had a bit of car damage, and you know he's he's always trying to fight his way back from a poor qualifying. So there are a few things that make it a little bit unfair, I think, on Perez. But I take your point. I do think that science is probably is an upgrade on Perez.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but what about the other two? So, but I guess we're saying Ricardo, Nat.
Um, so I think the Ricardo is probably not in it, right? He is. It doesn't seem like he's in sync with the RB, and there are already quite clear indications of the frustration within Red Bull's think tank, the upper echelon, if you will, about Daniel not being up to speed. And generally, when Helmut Marko says that X driver needs to pick it up, that to me is like that first nail in the coffin, so to speak, for that seat. So,
They've
and he's
got.
been pretty vocal, right? And then he's also handily gotten beaten by Yuki too. I mean, so there it isn't just all a matter of opinion or speculation or conjecture by any means. It is actually backed up by facts. And Daniel doesn't seem like he is he's up for this.
So why is Yuki not in their sights? Why is Yuki not the prime candidate? He's been there for
Probably, yeah.
he's been in Red Bull 2 for 2 or 3 seasons. He's Helmut was keen to get him into F1, fairly quickly after his F2 season, which he didn't win it, but he was rapid. So he fully deserved his
I
seat
would
at
agree.
the F1 table. And okay, he hasn't been on it off the bat. We know from Drive to Survive that he's needed to get his head in the game. But right now, he's comprehensively outperforming Daniel Ricciardo. So
Yeah.
why is he not?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think this is a question of who he's being compared against, right? So Daniel is out in my opinion. But the question now is between Yuki and Carlos, what is it that you really desire as a team, right? Do you want to kind of invest in the future, see what Yuki's like, and see if he can grow into that mold of when Max eventually retires? That could be the way of thinking about this. They've severed ties with Honda completely, right? At least last time I checked. Sometimes these things come back on really fast, so you never know. But if that's the case, then I don't know what he brings in terms of commercial value compared to Carlos, and I think that would be an interesting deep dive into what that would mean and if that means anything for Red Bull, because they certainly seem to have held on to Perez despite their own frustrations with him, in
Yeah,
part because of him selling those beverages in
yeah.
in
I
really
mean,
in America, right? So
but what a terrible reason to want to keep a driver though. Like
completely agree with you.
especially a seat like Red Bull where
Sure.
it's so competitive. Like anyone would want to drive for that. That's not a good reason for me. It's a good reason for RB to hold on to somebody like Daniel Ricciardo or even Sergio Perez because of the commercial value that they bring and the revenue that would bring to the team. Red Bull don't really need that, do they?
They don't really need it, but they seem to have gone that way too, right? And I think they also, when you have the luxury of having a Max Verstappen in the team, I mean, look, he single-handedly won them the constructors last year. You could argue that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
is not meant to put Perez down by any stretch of the imagination, but when you have someone like a Max who is a once in a generational type of talent, then I think you kind of have the luxury to play around a bit with that seat. And again, this is speculating into what their financial goals and objectives and aspirations are, right? So I have no way to know that, but it was pretty clear that when Perez was on the hot seat, so to speak, it seemed like at least that played out in public that he, because of his Mexican origin and his American ties, and it just sort
Yeah.
of made sense. So I would kind of agree with you. I mean, I think it would make sense to take Yuki up to that next level if they truly feel that he's up there. But one more thing is look at what we saw in Bahrain again, right? I mean, Yuki
Mm.
showed a bit of childish frustration with how that race sort of went towards the end. And God, can you imagine Yuki and Max fighting it out? That because Yuki's not going
I
to
mean,
want to
it'd
give
be
in,
volatile, though, wouldn't it? Yeah,
right?
I
Um,
mean, I'd be happy to just listen to both teams, the
radio.
team's team radio for the entire race. That'd be amusing on itself. But I agree. I don't really know what Yuki has to do. When asked about Yuki's performance in Australia, Horner's reply was, "Yeah, Yuki was pretty fast, but we have to look to find the best pairing at Red Bull."
Yep.
And then he immediately referenced Carlos Sainz. So it feels like that there's nothing that Yuki can do really, like to get that seat at Red Bull. So okay, well, I'm gonna throw a little curveball in here. So
Yeah.
I've just read an article from Mark Hughes at the
Mm.
race,
Hmm.
um, and he's talked about the relationship that Verstappen and the Verstappens, Jos included, have with Red Bull
Hmm.
one, and how Max's first season in F1 against Carlos in 2015 played out. There's an interesting relationship there. And what Mark's perspective on this and he's thrown in a bunch of stuff that I have to say I didn't know anything about. And if you guys in the comments knew about this, then please feel free to comment a bit more on it. But what he's essentially said is that Max got into to the Red Bull seat because Marco, Helmut Marco really wanted him. Oh, there's that thumb again. Really wanted him, and wanted him, at almost any cost. At the time, Mercedes were after him as well, and the Verstappens essentially kind of said, "Look, if you don't put us in a Toro Rosso right now, we're going to go to Mercedes." And that was used as a bargaining chip, which Helmut Marko went for, put him in a Toro Rosso. That bit of it we kind of knew, but the interesting thing here was that in the first few races at Toro Rosso, when Max was felt to have been given uh, less favorable treatment than Carlos, the Verstappens would bypass the Toro Rosso hierarchy and would go straight to Marco and say, "We don't like this." And Marco would then tell the Toro Rosso guys, "No, no, you're going to do what's in Max's best interests." Um, and this culminated ultimately in a 2016 event where in Sochi, um, Carlos Sainz's engineering team did what was best for Carlos Sainz when it wasn't what was best for Max, and members of that team got fired. Now I'm taking this all from a single source, just from what Mark Hughes has written in his article, but that's insane to me that in their first season together, they're both rookies. Um, that the Red Bull hierarchy were forced to kind of do what Max's team wanted. Now that's played out, right, ultimately, because if you look at our head to head of Max versus Carlos over the course of that season, I'm going to put up our table. There's just a quick table of qualifying and race results. Max was clearly about 2/10 quicker if you take the DNFs out of qualifying over the course of that season, and Carlos very marginally beat him in the races in the head to head. Although the results on track didn't necessarily reflect that. But I do think that and I'm going to reiterate again, this is a single source that does make it a fiery environment for Max and Carlos to go into, um, especially if Carlos is competitive. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think I read a little bit about that story, not as much as you did, but my first sort of take on this is times have changed, right? In every sense of the word. And Max is a three-time champion, soon to be probably a four-time champion. Carlos is in a different mind frame. I would like to think that if they were to be paired together, that they would figure out a way to coexist while still competing and not pulling up those strings. I think the other sort of unknown is what is the interpersonal dynamics at Red Bull. Like we've been a bit quiet with all of the Horner corner saga, if you will, for a couple of weeks, but there's been a lot of bad blood, right? And I can't really say if Marco has the kind of say that it's been projected to have. What does Christian Horner really think? Although he says all the right things in public, he couldn't have been happy with how Jos Verstappen put his name behind something like that. And there's the whole idea of Max leaving too. So then do Red Bull kind of bring Carlos in to sort of say, okay, well, if this is how it's going to be, then you just sort of like kind of put that in there, right?
That's it. That's
And
it.
you say,
I,
okay,
I mean, I think the Marco thing is the fact that Marco's power, what it sounds like from this article and from what Horner's kind of said, is that it revolves around what Verstappen does. Like that's the linchpin of it. He's kind
right.
of like, you're going to lose Max if I'm not here, and the Verstappens have kind of backed him up on that as well and said that we're leaving if he goes. So Horner's kind of in that position where he's kind of going, well, okay, fine, right. If that's what you're going to do, then I'm gonna make some things a bit more difficult for you as well, because I think of all of the alternatives, Sainz isn't gonna come in and beat Max Verstappen, right? He's not, because Max is too good,
Yeah.
and
It's too
he's
far
too
ahead too now. So
and he's too in tune with
yeah.
that car. So on performance, that's not going to happen, right? Blanket. But Carlos can make his life difficult, right, in a way that Perez can't, because Carlos is much more adaptable. Just look at what he's done at Ferrari, right? Like he's been able to really bring it to Charles. Like I still don't think that overall the performance balance has changed there, but Carlos has made that much more of an argument now than I think anyone would have really felt that he could have. And I think he can do that at Red Bull as well. Like I don't think he's going to beat him on qualifying, but I think he can get close enough. I think he can really start to get into that window.
Yeah.
And in the races, he will start to put some pressure on Max, just like he did in 2015, based on the stats that we've got here. That's something that Max doesn't necessarily want, doesn't necessarily need. It's something that maybe Red Bull don't even need, but it's something that Horner can use, and
Well,
and that makes Sainz an enticing prospect for me anyway.
yeah.
And he should be, anybody looking at this from the
He should be
outside
at the top of
should
the
should
list. Yeah.
should should see this
Yeah.
as a really enticing prospect, especially when we're talking about the way the last few seasons have gone.
Yeah.
It'd be brilliant to watch those two go at it again.
Yeah. And so I mean, I think my final thing in this is, does Max retire, right? Because he's spoken about that. He's talked about wanting to take a break at some point, wanting to go and do other forms of racing. He's made that pretty clear. So I mean, this is trying to read into the mind of Max Verstappen, which is said to say, hey, he might just hang up his shoes after, at least for a little bit after doing this for a year or two and say, okay, I want to step away. So if he does decide to do that, then that changes the dynamic of everything. Then I would imagine that Red Bull would want to hang on to Checo and then maybe just put Carlos right there, and
Right.
they have some
So that's
continuity and some
that's
competition. Yeah.
well, that's a nice segue, because if Verstappen leaves, that's the next potential in this little gambit. So if Verstappen leaves, first of all, let's just deal with what happens at Red Bull. So if Verstappen leaves, then I think Carlos is the shoe-in, and he will. For me, he'll win titles there. He'll definitely win that title, and for me, I would take Sainz over the obvious other alternative who's gunning for that seat at the moment, and that is Fernando El Plan
Alonso.
Alonso, who to be fair, we didn't talk about in terms of taking Perez's seat, because I think if Sainz is one thing, I think Fernando in that seat next to Verstappen, mate, that would be box office.
I mean, the whole
Tell me I'm wrong.
The Red Bull Ferrari thing would then be so interesting, right? Because you would have effectively four alpha males digging it out, and these are the
Ooh.
two teams that look like they are at the top of they have the best chance of winning championships. You know what? It might just happen so then that McLaren sort of beats them both because they're just fighting amongst each other, and then here you have,
As oh yeah, yeah.
it could end up being that way. But yeah, I think that's a fascinating thing to think about, right? And what makes the driver carousel so interesting is that there are many options, right? Max can leave, or he can leave to go to another team. Uh, Fernando the same way. He can stay, he can retire, or he might get one of the two Red Bull seats. It's just fascinating, and I think
This could be
the
the
Max and
culmination.
Alonso. Oh my
I mean,
God.
can you imagine that Alonso ending up in a Red Bull would be basically the culmination of,
I
he messed it up in 2007, right? And he's been trying to walk
yeah.
that back for the last sort of
Well,
15,
but
16
if the
years.
Verstappens are going to have tension with Sainz, do they really want to welcome Alonso then? I mean, because that's next level, right? I mean, Alonso doesn't need his dad to do any of or any of his family. He could take care of everybody on his own.
Yeah. I mean, like, again, he's not gonna beat Verstappen on pace, but he's
He can
gonna
make
throw bombs in there, isn't he? That's just gonna destabilize that position. And but he, I think with Fernando, I don't I don't think he's got the ultimate qualifying pace to beat Max, but he'll make things much more interesting in the races, which I think is what Carlos would do. But I think Fernando perhaps he has even more race pace and race nous than Sainz does. He's like the granddaddy that Carlos is modeling his career on.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and with a
That's
bit
right.
more a little bit more self-political belief than perhaps Carlos has. So that I think would be very interesting.
It's,
But I think Fernando would be an interesting choice if Verstappen were to leave. And I think that brings us nicely onto the next available seat, which is the Mercedes seat.
oof.
Right. So for me, Mercedes is a much less enticing prospect now than it was for anyone 12, 24 months ago. So if Verstappen does decide to leave Red Bull and go to Mercedes, for me right now, that's a massive downgrade. Even with 2026 upcoming, that for me is a massive downgrade.
Yeah.
Because as we talked about in our previous video about where Mercedes stand, I think in the current era, in the 25, 26, well, sorry, certainly in the 24, 25 bracket, I don't think they know what they're doing, really. And 2026 is now a much bigger gamble because they don't have the engine guy, Andy Cowell, that was there before that gave them that big step up in 2014. Whereas Ferrari are definitely on the up when it comes to their engine. If you look at what the rumor mill is saying and what the performance guys are saying, Ferrari have the best engine right now, and perhaps the best um, will have the best potential come 2026 as well. So Mercedes aren't the team. So Toto Wolff might be wooing Max as much as he possibly can, and it might be the best available seat given the seats are already locked up at Ferrari, but it doesn't sound like a great seat to me anymore. What do you think?
It doesn't. And if I'm Max, I'm guessing I'm going to step away for a little bit because if he wanted to come back in 28, that I think he would still have, a choice of being able to come back. And who knows, he might come back to Ferrari at that point because you don't know where Lewis Hamilton's career ends too. So I definitely think that if Max is considering leaving Red Bull, he
Oh,
probably
just
will
sorry,
step
so,
away.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but why 2028? Like if he retires and says, right, I'm going to take a little gap
Well,
now,
because right now
why
his
does he have
current,
to wait till why does he have to wait till 2028? If he's broken his contract, surely any
yeah, I
other
guess it
team that
doesn't.
is
Yeah.
available can pick him up.
Yeah.
And I
So
think
Lewis,
I agree the obvious seat would be Ferrari,
Ferrari,
and
right? Yeah.
but that would be 2027, I guess, at
27.
the
Yeah.
earliest. We don't actually have a firm idea of when Lewis's contract ends. Would Ferrari potentially try and break Lewis's contract to get Max in? I, I think that's a definite potential because right now Max is probably the bigger draw than Lewis.
Yeah, as they say, the only thing that's possible is everything, right? So that's kind of where we're at. But I would suppose that if Max is going to leave this, he's not going to go to Mercedes because he can clearly tell where they're at. And I think all the flirting that they've been having with Toto Wolff is just, in my opinion, just a way to put Red Bull on a bit of a notice. Which I mean, hey, if Mercedes were slightly better, and they still might be, they still seem like they're so far away from Red Bull. Like that, I think is undeniable. So if I'm Max, I don't quite know why I'd want to step away from Red Bull and go to that seat in particular. That would kind of make no sense. But
But I
um,
think Fernando's now doing the same thing, right? He's actively courting a Red Bull seat rather than a Mercedes seat because that seat is not really the same as it was two or three seasons
yeah,
ago.
no,
Um,
no.
okay, so
It's
final little thing. So if let's say let's say that's a done deal. Let's say that Verstappen stays, Sainz goes up in the seat against him. Uh, Where does that leave Mercedes? What are their options, and who do you think is the best option?
Well, at that, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on what they intend to do for the next couple of years, right? Do they truly believe that they can claw their way back in and be in the mix for I can't say 24, maybe 25. That's just the question, and if the answer to that question is yes, we can come back in and be competitive at least and challenge for race wins every now and then you want to go with a driver or the caliber of a Checo Perez or an Alex Albon. At that point, you could pull him up to a Mercedes seat. There's not a whole lot of pickings out there. I mean, I think the whole Kimi Antonelli thing was a bit of a, I think we had all the hype and the hoopla, but I'm not even sure they would be doing right by him and putting him in the current setup, right? Um,
But I
but
think Kimi is actually the situation at Mercedes makes Kimi much more appropriate for that seat because they're at the moment they're not a front running team as much as they want to be. They're not. They're a midfield team,
if
right?
I'm
And
if
not
I'm Kimi, I'm thinking about staying another year right now. No, this is just I'm
well, no, I
poking
mean,
fun at it,
but
right?
because the seat an F1 team is
Well,
definitely
wait,
any F1 team
but
is
you made a
better
weird
than
face when I said Alex Albon. What's wrong with that?
because look, I think for Alex, yeah, it's a step up. I think it's difficult for him to get out of the Williams contract right now, but surely Mercedes will be going for somebody like Fernando on a single season. You know, my problem with that though is that Fernando may not see that seat as particularly attractive anymore.
Yeah.
Given that you know, given that Aston are on the march upwards, perhaps actually Fernando doesn't want to leave and
Yeah.
wants to stay at Aston Martin. And that actually brings me, Amar, I'm sorry, I have to bring
No,
this in
let's go.
into the biggest kingpin, the biggest move potentially of this silly season, and that is Ferrari and Aston Martin both going for Adrian Newey.
Oh my goodness. Is that really gonna happen or is it all
Nah,
rumors? No, it's not
nah,
gonna happen.
of course it's not going to happen. But if it does, if Adrian Newey decides to go for that big money move, which has now been reported in Autosport as well, so there's a bit of legitimacy behind it. Um, well, at least the offer. I don't think that Adrian Newey has actually sort of shown any interest yet, but the offer's definitely on the table. If he goes to
I
Aston
mean,
Martin, Aston are the prime seat, aren't they?
I hate to sort of think of it this way, right? Because we're talking about a team in Red Bull that has been historically dominant. They could be on a run even better than one from Mercedes, right? Because we talked about how Red Bull suffered at the hands of running those Renault engines for years and they couldn't really be competitive. But the kind of domination that Red Bull are on, if they're able to do this for another couple of years, that arguably the better the better sort of domination. And yet here we are talking about every is there anyone on the team we haven't left out as far as leaving or being potentially moved away? Like poor Perez. At the end of all of this, Checo Perez is going to be standing there, and he is going to be the one when the dust settles, and all of that. He's just going to be there. So I don't know. I mean, yes, we'd have to spend a little bit more time talking through what those moves mean, but if I'm Fernando, to get back to the point, right? Like why would I want to go to Mercedes unless he's
Yeah,
seeing something
agreed.
there that makes sense?
Yeah,
And look, I mean,
but
Mercedes have
he's
had a
definitely
poor
seen something
showing, but
that we're not.
yeah. And
Yeah.
then the question is Aston going to be able to catch up to the lead pack or not? Which is also another fascinating team to talk about, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah.
So the
So
question then is, does Fernando retire or move, right? And for how long? I think that's the other thing. I mean, he has, I think, for the first time that I can recall, talked about actually retiring at some point. Like he has, but again, you don't know if it's just mind games. Like that's the problem. So you can't really say what is he actually going to do?
yeah. And all of it will result in a move to I don't know Audi or something, and but yeah, he'll be stuck there for a few seasons. So that was our moderately brief run through the driver carousel as it stands at the moment. I think we've talked about pretty much everyone. We haven't mentioned Audi, but I think that uh, that's a bookmark for another day. But
Yeah.
I think in the medium or the short term at least, that's a step down for any of the drivers that we've just talked about. Certainly not in the periscope for somebody like Fernando who wants to be in a seat where he can win a title now. Um, but I
So
think those go on. Sorry, you were
no,
just
no,
going to
I
say
was going to
something.
say I want to bring this all to a closure by actually putting you on the spot here and actually making
Yeah,
some team principle like selections, right? So let's go through this. Ferrari is out of the way.
yeah.
McLaren is out of the way. All right, let's start with Red Bull there. Who do you think is driving in 25?
I am going to put my money on Carlos Sainz. I think
Along,
Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen alongside each other is going to be my pick for the 2025
okay.
season.
Okay, I'm gonna do a bit of a surprise pick here, and I would say that Red Bull probably keep both their drivers for at least another couple of years. I just don't see them doing that because they have a steady hand in Checo, and Max can do pretty much whatever he wants. Why invite any of that drama when they already have that? What do we make of Mercedes then?
I think Mercedes will want Fernando, but I think they're not going to get him, and I think they're going to have to settle for Kimi Antonelli. I
All
can't
right.
believe I'm saying they'll have to settle for Kimi, but I think that's probably what they're going to need to do.
I actually truly believe that they'll call Alex Albon up, because I think that these 2 years are them sort of trying to get their development in order and try to really get their car in order to be competitive for a couple of years. So I think it's a win-win. They can let Kimi kind of go through growing pains, go through all of that, maybe even bring him into that Williams seat, and then promote Albon just to kind of give him a shot at this. Do you want to do Aston Martin?
Hit me. You think Lance
What do
is
you
going to
think?
quit and go play tennis?
Dude, man, that's a tough seat. I think I'm gonna say Stroll retires. He's often the least talked about driver. I feel like we're all afraid. Like, is the mafia gonna come after us or something for criticizing Lance
Mate,
or saying anything about him?
I saw Lawrence, man. He looked pretty mean.
Yeah, he can be intimidating. I think Stroll finally hangs it up because I don't quite know what he's trying to accomplish other than just racing. It seems more like a passion and a hobby for him than anything else. This is not me being critical of someone that has to drive a car that, goes at a few hundred miles an hour. So but I do feel like he's going to step away. And I think that brings up a fascinating option that I believe that if either he or Fernando leaves, I think that's where Carlos goes. So he takes that Aston Martin seat. I think they have a bigger ceiling at this point, and he can be part of a project that he can really influence. And then the question is whether he's alongside Fernando or not, which I don't really know. At this point, I'm going to say yes, Fernando, but who knows?
Yeah, yeah. I think Carlos is a good plug and play. I think Carlos is the guy that, like, if as long as there is some movement in the driver market at the top of the tree, Carlos will find a seat somewhere. He's just too good not to get a seat. And he's making, like you said, Ferrari's decision look a bit silly right now. Even if I'll argue against that. But um, but I think that the Stroll thing, um, the interesting thing about the Stroll argument is that this is where Adrian Newey kind of comes into it. I think if Adrian Newey says Stroll stays because Lawrence is going to go, look, son, I've got Adrian Newey here now. We can definitely win a title
Oh, come
together.
on. He can't, Adrian, as great as Newey is, he can't make Stroll win. Come on. That's not, with all due respect to Stroll, but come on. Like, I don't, do we really believe that he would have had a seat had his dad not been owning a team in Formula One? Do
No,
we really
no, no,
believe
no,
that?
no,
So
no,
then,
no, no, no,
like,
no, no. But we none of us believe that. But that might be the little enticer because Lance probably believes that he could win a title in an Adrian Newey car.
yeah, indeed.
So maybe there you go.
Maybe.
And on that bombshell, time to call it. I think, Ammar.
Yep, let's do that. Thanks for watching. Please hit subscribe, leave us a comment. Thank you to all of you who've been commenting. As always, each comment gets viewed. Most of them get a response. We love the community that we've built here, and thanks for being part of it.